You're listening to Releasing Trauma, a survivor's podcast. And now here's your host, Tracy Osborne. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I got to tell you, I am super excited for this one today. I have been fascinated by the topic of dissociative identity disorder, or as many people still know it as multiple personality disorder I can't even, excuse me, I can't even tell you how long, way back in the days of Sybil and Eve, the multiple faces of Eve, I think is really when my interest peaked that our brains can adapt and cope and protect us in such a way that they kind of fracture and create different alters or identities to help us deal with our life. With me today is Lyn Barrett. She is the author of Crazy. Let me get the whole title here. It's Crazy, Reclaiming from the Shadow of Traumatic Memory. And it's her memoir about having a DID or dissociative identity disorder. And I just finished reading this book and it was an amazing story. Just an amazing journey of how she, maneuvered through everything that was happening with her. So, Lyn, welcome to the show.
Hi, Tracy. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited. And don't get me wrong, when I say that I am, fascinated by this, I can't even begin to imagine what it would be like to have this, DID and, I've seen so many people and I follow a lot of DID systems on TikTok. And, so I know that they're all different and, some will have amnesia, some don't, some will be co-conscious and, and there's so many different aspects about it. And it's, I come at it from more of a, like a mental health therapy, or scientific fascination, but I just can't even begin to imagine what it's like to not know who you are, basically. And that's kind of where you went. You at one point were, life was great. You were happy. You were a wife. You were a mother. And then, bam, one day life just kind of went topsy-turvy.
Yes. And Tracy, I think that it is a fascinating coping strategy that the mind and body use to protect the small child who's being chronically abused or traumatized. And even those of us who have this disorder, I think that we are a mix of being fascinated with it too, just as you are, also sometimes being disbelieving of it because it's hard to get our minds around it too. And then, of course, it is the living through it, which is not at all fascinating.
Oh, I'm sure.
Pretty terrible and painful and confusing and chaotic. And so, in my case, I was a happy, let's put it all into perspective. So when I was growing up, I have very few memories of my childhood and some memories of adolescence, but they were always very painful. I felt like I was totally defective, but I managed to create what I thought was a normal, happy life with a husband and children. And indeed, there was a lot of happiness in there during at the time, that part of my life. But I look back even on that time, and I can remember meltdowns. I don't know what other word to call them, but they were really triggers that caused me to do sort of crazy things but I got it under control right away, and because I wanted to be a normal person. I wanted to be a happy person. So I would get it under control. And I had no idea what those meltdown trigger kinds of things were or what they meant. And so I kind of went through my life. Anything that wasn't good in my life, I had really sealed in denial so that I could live in this happiness bubble. And then, but we can't do that forever. And I think this is true for all trauma survivors, not just those who use a dissociative identity disorder as a strategy. You can't keep it in forever. It starts to leak out in different ways. And so it started to do that for me while I was in the midst of this so-called happy life. And, then I discovered that my husband had been having an affair for 2 years. And then I realized that there were the signs of affairs, for all 20 years that we had been married, but I was not willing to see them. That was a major trigger of betrayal that mimicked my original betrayals. And so my whole system fell apart, but then I didn't know I had a system. Mm-hmm. I didn't know I had parts. I just felt like I was going crazy, which is why I called the book Crazy, Reclaiming Life from the Shadow of Traumatic Memory. I want to say right now that I wasn't crazy and that other people with dissociative disorder are not crazy, but we all often feel very crazy. And I want to be explicit in that because I have gotten pushback on the title because some people feel that it is disrespectful of people with DID. And I took that criticism seriously and went back and tried very hard, to see, could I take that word out and substitute a different kind of title? And I literally couldn't take the word out because that's the word that I used. It's the only word that I had to describe how I felt. It's when you feel like first of all, you don't feel real. It's like you're up in the corner of a room watching yourself go through the motions of life, not being in touch with your real emotions, but instead being in touch with these crazy feelings that come out of nowhere, or else just feeling completely numb. And here's the real stickler here is that you can actually feel numb and overwhelming emotions at the same time. Now, I don't know how that happens, but it's true. And I'm not the only person that happens for. That's right. Really common in DID, that you feel numb and overwhelming emotions that come out of nowhere at the same time. And you have different streams of thought going through your mind at the same time. And you don't really understand why it is you feel this way and that way and that way and that way and that way. And they all are conflicting with each other. I had body pain everywhere. And often I just had to roll up into a ball, into the fetal position, in bed just to cope with breathing, I think the most heartbreaking aspect was that I loved my children with so much feeling, and that went away. It disappeared. I couldn't get it again. And I later learned that it was one particular altar who held those feelings, and she was spooked by what was going on at home, and she disappeared. And so I lost that. Of course, there is amnesia. I didn't experience a lot of time loss, but I had already lost my whole childhood, and I couldn't remember any of it. And so I just kept trying to to survive, really. And my marriage fell apart, and that meant that I was a single parent, and it was just a very challenging time for me. I had suicidal ideation almost all the time. I attempted suicide once, and thankfully I was not successful. But of course, when I came out of that experience, part of me was saying, you're going to live until you die, Lyn. We're going to live until we die. We're going to just seize the day. And then another part of me was saying, oh my gosh, you are such a wimp. You are pathetic. You can't even commit suicide well. And I mean, that's a really tragic little vignette that I'm sharing with you, that, that's how I would be responding. But those were different parts of me having these conversations about what was happening. Here's the other clincher, is that at the same time that all of this was happening, I was excelling professionally. I was a teacher. I became the head of school. Later, I went back to school to get my administrator certificate. I was in public school. I was a school principal of a 550 student elementary school. I was excelling here, and I would go home and I would just crawl into a ball, or I would be experiencing all of these other symptoms that I explained to you. And so this was, of course, also a function of the fact that I had parts who could go out and work in real life, right, and keep a roof over my head, but those parts didn't stay with me when I would go home. They stepped aside so that the parts who were in deep pain would be able to have their voice or their time. And so anyway, I'm just sort of babbling here and
no, you're fine.
Sense of what it was like, but feel free to ask me other questions about my story.
Yeah. I mean, so I know about, many of the different authors that you talked about in your book. So Laura was the mom, and right. Paula was the professional. And then, the one that fascinated me the most, I think, was Protector, because he was your creator, right?
That's what it felt like. That's what he said to me, Yeah. Yes, he said that he created me because he saw that I needed help. Yeah. And that he created all of my different parts to help protect me. And in fact, there were times when he I think the way I explained it is he wasn't like an active participant in right. my daily life. But if things were really getting bad, he would come in. And so if my suicidal ideation was getting really close to enactment, he would come in and sort of steer me away from that. If I was incredibly triggered and my whole system was in a turmoil, he might come out and just cover us with a metaphorical blanket and tell us to rest and sleep so that we could manage better when we right. get rested. So he was I think he was really an important part of my system. I don't know if you recall. So my story also is a faith journey, and it's not yes. the kind of faith journey where I'm trying to convince anybody else of anything. I'm just trying to, describe how I was experiencing things, and I was a lifelong atheist.
Yeah, so, I was going to ask you about yeah. that. And then all of a sudden, you're teaching in a Quaker school.
Yeah, right.
So
it's just so when Protector sort of appeared to me, I went into my therapist and I said, God visited me. His name is Protector, and he made all of my altars. And she said, Lyn, I don't think that that was God. I think that was an altar. And I didn't believe that at first. I really wanted to think that it was God, but I finally gave in because Protector himself told me that he wasn't God. So, yes. But anyway, I thought that was kind of a sweet thing for me because it did actually coincide with some of the experiences I was having faith-wise. So, yeah. Well, any other questions about Protector? I can't remember.
No, no, you're good. Now, you talk a lot in the book about icicles. Mm-hmm. Tell us about the icicles and what did that mean?
Yeah. So, in a sense, the icicles are a metaphor to help describe what it feels like to be dissociated. When I was a little girl, we had actually what you call tinsel. I don't think they even have that anymore on Christmas trees. But we had tinsel, mm-hmm. and of course they were terrible because they fell all over the floor and they were a mess to clean up. But they just shimmered on the tree. They shimmered, mm-hmm. and they were beautiful. And so when I was triggered or afraid or just experiencing some other form of craziness through dissociation, I describe it as the icicles in the back of my brain that helped me get through that moment, or that shielded me from the knowledge of something, that allowed me to remain standing when, in fact, I felt like I was going to die. The dissociation, it's a two-edged sword. The dissociation prevents us from living our fullest lives, and it ultimately is it's the thing that tells us that something's wrong, because it does shield us from all kinds of things. But the other side of that coin is that it is a protective mechanism for us. So ultimately, in our healing, we have to heal our dissociation because that was our coping strategy as children. Now we're using it as adults. As adults, it's no longer really functional because one time I was dissociating when I was leading a parent meeting at school. And I had, and Rosie, who was my little 2-year-old, came out, and this is not helpful. This is not helpful. And I my system managed to work its way through that time. But it was awful. And if it happened again, or if it was going to continue to happen, it would have destroyed my ability to support myself, and it would have destroyed my career. So dissociation is not helpful for us as adults, but it is a protective mechanism. So that's that two-edged sword where I had these beautiful little icicles in the back of my brain that were trying to protect me, and in many ways were protecting me, but they were also a stumbling block and a huge obstacle for being healthy. So ultimately, the therapy that we do, and I think this is in many ways typical of trauma therapy, regardless of whether the diagnosis is DID or not, is to keep bringing the story forward, to keep talking about it, to take the to make it become real. So our stories are unreal. They're in our back brain, our emotional brain, and we don't want to believe they're true. And so we have to start talking about them and bringing them forward so they do become real for us. And as they become more real, then we're able to let go of some of that dissociation. And of course, there's lots of other things that are involved in healing from DID, but I think that's an important one.
Yeah. Now, in your healing, you had a fantastic therapist. You stumbled upon a gem, who it sounds like was just absolutely instrumental in helping you. And you ultimately were able to integrate, correct?
Yes.
So, what does that look like now? Is it more of a sense of calm and peace and all your parts are acting as one, or how does that work?
Well, that's a good question. And I think what you just said, it probably describes it reasonably well. But I also want to say that integration probably looks and feels differently to different people.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I'm so that what it is for me may not be what it is for you if to somebody out there, who has DID. Integration and there's a little bit of controversy or disagreement about terminology, but I'm going to use integration as the word I use because that's the word that I was familiar with back when that was happening. Integration is when all of your parts know all of your other parts and understand the stories and they collaborate really well together. And when they decide that life might be better as one than as many. And so in my case, they don't disappear. So the reason why they can't disappear is because, at least according to the structural theory of dissociation, this is the way my brain developed when I was a very young girl. So that can't change. Okay. But they just back off, and I say they've fallen asleep among the neural folds of my brain. I mean, that's just what I say. I don't know that that's exactly what happens. But they do come up every now. So I didn't really push to be integrated. I didn't even totally understand what that meant. But I think they kind of naturally wanted to come back to a wholeness, and they sort of did it on their own without me being a part of it. That's not true for everyone. I think sometimes there's some real therapeutic intervention to help integrations, and that integrations happen one by one. I would say that most of mine happened at the same time. I think there were a few that sort of were stragglers, but they still come up every now and then if they have something to say. And in fact, I'm kind of excited because I have a story that was written that I wrote that had to. Mike was my angry alter, and he. So this story is written around his feelings about forgiveness. And so I just found out that it was just published yesterday in an online journal called the OM magazine, OM. So if anybody wants to look that up, they can. So I'm kind of excited about that. But Mike is the one who most likely will come up if somebody does, although some of the others do too now and then. Yeah. But if Mike is angry about something, he will tell me about it. I want to say that through him, I found that anger can be a really good thing if it's used appropriately. And through him, I learned how to embrace my anger and also use it for my healing, not to hurt other people. Obviously, unbridled anger is not a good thing. But in my case with Mike, he was in therapy too with me. So we worked through things, and so I am grateful that his anger enabled me to rise above my pain, really, and to fake it until I made it, and so on and so forth. Because he was really angry that my life had gone off track, and he worked really, really hard to help me get it back on track. So.
I like that. So that leads me to my last question before we wrap up. And that is, when you wrote the book, was it you writing the book, or was it all of you writing the book?
Well, that's another good question. I believe it began being me writing it.
Okay.
And then as actually, I would say the whole first draft was me writing it. And then I had some beta readers who gave me some suggestions, which pushed me deeper. And then I had a wonderful editor who also made some suggestions. She said, "Lyn, you're a wonderful writer, but now I'm going to teach you how to tell a story." And that's when I went back to all my old journals. I brought everything out, and that's when everybody got a voice. So I think I'd like to think everybody got a voice. It is true that I didn't include every single author,
right.
But I included all the foundational ones, and so they all got a voice, and so it was a collaborative effort. So thank you for asking.
That's awesome.
They appreciate that.
Well, Lyn, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me today. This has just been amazing. I'm just so thankful to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Tracy, for inviting me. And I want to thank your listeners for listening in. And I hope that some of the things I've said help to clarify what DID is, and maybe to help erase some of the stigma around it. I would also just like to make that plug that if you have DID, even though you are maybe in deep pain right now and confusion and chaos, that there is hope, absolutely, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So find that wonderful therapist who will help you walk through it.
That's amazing. Thank you. Listeners, as you know, I will have all of Lyn's contact information in the show notes. If you go to releasingtraumapodcast.com and pull up Lyn's episode, all her contact information, the link to her book, I will go find that article and post the link there too. Everything will be there for you. So again, Lyn, I thank you so much. And everybody, and your system for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And listeners, as always, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you in the next show. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure you hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss a show. Be sure to check us out on our new socials on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.